but General BERDILÂN and Greg MELCHER couldn't. So they are now they now try to entangle themselves from that luncheon, very high-level luncheon, and then we can start. And if it takes them more than 5 minutes, I'll probably start singing songs. So your patience, please.
Afternoon. Sorry for our delay. We were unavoidably detained upstairs. So George has asked me to try to keep on schedule, so that will cut our time down a bit. This panel is on challenges to Western military capabilities in light of the Russian-Ukrainian war. I'm Greg Melcher, by the way, Chief Operations Officer for the Center of the Study of New Generation Warfare. Now, ordinarily, I do maybe a 3 or 4 sentence introduction. However, you can go on the website and you can find their bios, so I think we'll just go with their titles and go right to it. Of course, you have General BERDILÂN, who's the Deputy Chief for Ops and Training for the Romanian military. Sir James EVERARD, who's the head of the NATO Mentors Program, a former Deputy SACEUR. Brigadier General Hans DAMEN, used to be Mr. Logistics. And Mr. Justin CRUMP, who's the CEO of a very interesting company, Sybilline. So with that, I think we'll just go right into it. And I think it's about 5-6 minutes each, and then we'll have time for some questions. And I had a lead in, but I'm going to skip that also. So I think I'm just going to go right to, why don't we just go right to the line? That means you get to speak first.
Thank you so much, Greg. Great to see everyone after lunch. I think this is one of the most interesting panels. We'll see after this, as we think we will have most of the questions. There were good discussions upstairs, and I tell you what, I already have some of the answers, but I will not plagiarize. So, one point to make from the beginning: this is an important session of the Balkan and Black Sea Security Forum because it comes at the right time and space. We're all expecting some sort of development or offensive, you should read that, in Ukraine. An approach to victory, to whatever we measure that. But also, we're here to re-galvanize on some of the ideas we have, and especially questions followed by solutions, hopefully. 2 or 3 points I would like to make. I started the other panel that I had in the morning with this crucial and vital importance of the recent developments in NATO, the integration between the regional plans and the national plans, a pillar that we all needed to provide faster, timely, and hopefully more successful operational solutions to all the allies to consolidate deterrence and defense. And I say this because it came at the right moment, and it came with an effort of all the allies and some of the partners to contribute to how the plans were developed, and now they're sitting to expect the Vilnius summit with success. On that, I want to underline the full responsibility that an ally like Romania has to rapidly operationalize the integration requirement. What I mean with that, we need to measure fast and successful. How do we integrate the plans? Because we need to fight, and not just fight, but win tonight. If that comes, And then from the military perspective, we need to make sure the battle groups that you all heard of are successful, are ready, increased readiness, self-sustainable, but also integrated into the concept of operation with the allies on the front line, and this being the case for Romania too. And I can tell you one example for that is the Collective Defense Battle Group led by France in Chinku, or the Brigade Combat Team of US and MK. The other contingents present today, North Macedonia, Portugal, Poland, so Dutch, Belgium, Luxembourg. So the allies are present in this solidarity translation into operational solutions. And when you hear regional plans, for some of us, you think it's the geography that matters, but no, this is not just the geography. It's the manifestation of that solidarity to the allies to provide the right capabilities to actually not just train. This is a mission partnership, not just a training partnership. One, two. Still the military, and in this case, Romanian armed forces, they still need to continue to successfully address three pillars. This current fight, the integration of the capabilities that I determined for midterm and long-term following the synchronization of plans, but also how do you keep transform and modernize? We so smartly invested some years ago with the decision to commit the 2%, now 2.5%, into some of the capabilities that are just, it's not modernization, it's changing the arsenal, it's becoming more relevant. Different generations of land capabilities, Air Force, maritime. That was a smart decision to have today, this relevancy to still transform and modernize. One point to that, how do you transform your human resource when you look at the generations that you have today in teenagers, and I forgot the letter, Generation Y, Z, whatever, but they're changing. You have a different texture of humans out there that understand conflict, war, and with different perspectives, and you need to capitalize that. So that's, in my previous job as Chief of the Land Forces, I used to call the human resource the main acquisition program for the land forces, because that's your most priority. You can get HIMARS, you can get a lot of the capabilities, self-propelled howitzers, ISR, but unless you have the right and adequate with competencies, human resource, you need to invest in that, you're going to fail the full operational capability of that weapon. The last point that I would like to make is, okay, so this is changing, three pillars, integration requirements. What's the cost? If this was, we're going from a peacetime metabolism of the armed forces, and you go into crisis, almost conflict, what is the cost to this for the next 10 years? What is also the cost when you bring high technology weapons into the force? Because now the investment in training, the investment in selection and recruitment, the investment in regeneration capabilities, the ammunition, the industrial base that needs to be in concert with your capabilities, narrative, the conference, the forum today, this is an investment too. So when you look at this, it's not just only money, but what are your resources prepared to what the Prime Minister declared for Romania to be a pivot today in the region? Well, and are we ready as a society to commit to that? Greg, I'm going to stop here and allow for more questions in the end, and I'm sure the other panelists will bring more and better ideas for the dialogue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, General. I'll go Justin Crump from Sybilline. Am I saying your company name correctly?
It's Sybilline.
Sybilline, okay.
If you're going to start a company, pick a name that people can spell, that they can pronounce, and that you own the website domain for. That's my top tip. So I may have failed in all those. My background is in the land environment. I've been a British cavalry officer for most of my career, regular and reserve, and I'm now an OSINTER, effectively, in what I do in civilian life. So I apologize if any of my examples and things I'm going to talk about are a bit more land-focused. I will try and remember the air and the maritime components, but to some extent, of course, Ukraine has been very heavily a land conflict. So, of course, there are more obvious lessons to draw out of that, but I'll try and keep it general. But exactly as we heard, this is an interesting moment in time, and I think also when you talk about cost, we should bear in mind that we have had 30 plus years of probably unrivaled global growth, global prosperity. We have lived with that for a generation, and sometimes we look back at history and 30 years doesn't seem like a long time in the history books. You turn the page, they jump 30 years. But actually this has been a lifetime for many of the people in our armed forces of a time of peace. And along with that comes economic prosperity, and I think some of the shock around Russia's action in Ukraine, which was eminently forecastable strategically in terms of open source in particular, you could literally see it unfolding. You could see traffic jams at the border of tanks waiting to cross on Google Maps. You know, despite all this evidence, we were still shocked by this. And I think for Europe in particular, the fact that a nation could go to war in 2022 for something as tawdry as national pride and the seizure of territory. And the thing I heard the most in the week before the invasion was, why on earth would they sacrifice economic prosperity for something like that? You know, surely no one wants to give up their economic prosperity. So we've grown up with that mindset, and there is fundamentally a real challenge here. And of course, NATO knows this more than most, with many years in the wilderness almost of finding the mission. And of course, ironically, it's come back to NATO's original mission. And again, 30 years, a long time for us, a short time in history. So I think it's very important to reflect on this moment and what it means, because the world is getting more complex. Many tensions have built up over the last 30 years. We have lots of problems. They are problems of success. We have more people on the planet, we keep them alive longer, so we're more prone to have pandemics because we have global travel and there's more of us. We live in areas that are more exposed to flooding, to heat waves. We're more reliant on getting food just in time from wherever it's originating from. We don't have resilient societies, again, because of money. You know, and I think, of course, the armed forces feel that more than most when the missions haven't been clear. But to bring that context into something that answers the question, what does it mean for our capabilities? There are three components, as we know, of combat power. There is the conceptual component. What are you trying to do? Do you understand things? There's the physical component. What do you have? Tanks, troops, and guns. And there's the moral component. Why are you doing what you are doing? And I think there are lessons from Ukraine across all three of those. And I just want to dive into some. And anyone who's hoping for a very detailed explanation of exactly which UAV systems or unmanned maritime systems, I'm sorry, I'm probably going to get into that level of detail, but we can discuss that in questions. I want to start with the conceptual. And I swear to goodness, in Afghanistan and Iraq, if we'd taken all the concepts worked on by staff officers, printed them out from PowerPoint into big packs, and shoveled them out of the back of a Hercules onto the enemy, we'd probably have killed more of the enemy with our PowerPoint slides in that way than we actually managed to do on the ground. I've never seen, I think, so much intellectual thinking, concepts, schemes, plans, pamphlets, think tanks, and everything that we all work on about how to fight war in the 21st century. Partly that's because we have very professional Western armed forces, and although it may seem as a surprise to some of us, we haven't had a lot else to do other than for our staff cadre to think about how we would fight if only we actually had the tanks and the guns and the ships and the planes. But we've put a huge amount of thought into this. And I think what's very interesting is when we look at lessons from Ukraine, I don't think many are at all surprising. If you look at a lot of our experimentation, the work done by the Defence Concepts and Doctrine Centre in the UK on futures, this is all stuff that we knew about, we anticipated. We could see that cities were going to be a massive struggle to capture on the modern battlefield. We could see the role of autonomous systems, of UAVs, you know, all of these sorts of things. You could see it. It was still a conceptual jump to try and put it into practice, and I think that challenge, you know, stymied us being able to do it. But none of these lessons are actually, I don't think, new. For example, in terms of our tactics, we know what to do, and our tactics do work. What we're seeing, though, is that you have to do them faster and better. And that's been the real lesson, the way that sensors mean that you have to move faster on the battlefield, you have to be agile, you have to be able to make decisions quickly to be able to succeed. But we knew this. Exercises like Sabre Junction showed us all of these lessons 10 years ago. You know, we knew what it would look like. We knew, certainly when we went towards Estonia, what it might look like fighting. So the great thing is, actually, in some way, there aren't new lessons. The problem, I think, is that we've identified our lessons, but we haven't actually learned them. We talk about lessons learned. I think it's lessons identified at the moment, but it's really expensive and sometimes radical to do something to actually identify and get that lesson into practice. And I think that's where we've been challenged. It's not quite a dreadnought moment where actually if you embrace a new approach, it means your entire legacy structure is redundant. But there's a little element of that, and that might be, for example, where the Romanians and nations like that can more easily pivot have the advantage of being able to say, we can do this differently. We can learn these lessons and become more agile, because you don't have the legacy of the past. So that's the conceptual piece. The physical piece, the key lesson here is we've learned it still matters. You can't replace mass on the battlefield. We can't completely magic away casualties. We can't magic away equipment losses. And I think when people focus on tanks, for example, they forget that the tank is ultimately not designed to be impervious to anything on the battlefield. It's just designed to last longer. But you don't expect that you're never going to lose a tank. You're never going to lose an armored vehicle. You're not going to have soldiers killed in action. That is the price of doing war. So you do need to have the physical depth. Now, again, that comes with money. And to some extent, we try and make up with technology for a lack of numbers. But we're still seeing that mass counts on the battlefield. And that's very expensive to maintain, as we're seeing. So, of course, it drives the growth of alliances, the reliance on each other as partners, against which you therefore can't pursue a national mission if you haven't got the mass yourself. You've got to work with your partners, and what if they don't want to join your mission? So there's that real challenge, and there's a very strong diplomatic component for us to generate the physical components we need and to be able to afford the best we can in all of that. And key things that we have seen, though, is whatever you have needs to be agile, it needs to be flexible, and of course you've got to face a range of tasks. Because we have things like Sudan, non-combatant evacuation operation, going on at the same time as supporting Ukraine, at the same time as potentially other escalations globally, and we're having to cover lots of different missions with the same pot. And of course, that further requires numbers, you can't get away from it. And the final part is the moral part, and I think what I'd like to go on here particularly is society. And when we talk about intelligence and information, of course, these wars now are not happening in isolation. They're extending into our civilian base. They're very much part of things. All conflicts are global, even if they're local in nature. And the hearts and minds battle, if you like, is as important off the battlefield as on it. Ukraine has understood that brilliantly well from the start. We've known that in the West, but we do have some issues sometimes in engaging in the information space. We actually used to be better at it than the Russians. We let that go in '92 when we disbanded that capability. But that is such an important area. And of course, we have this difference in society, as you said, General. We have different generations. The British Army may even have to introduce beards for its soldiers, which is, unthinkable. But, we're having arguments about what it is to be a soldier in this day and age. And at a time when people are expecting to have 10 to 20 career movements in their lifetimes, they might work for 20 different businesses across their career. Do we still expect soldiers to serve 22 years in one job? Do we have to follow something like the Israeli model of trying to integrate the military more into society to have a more resilient base, a more understanding of what the military is, and the ability to scale up from that? And also to learn the lessons from civilian life back into the military. And I would say that one thing we have all potentially failed at is the way that we've approached our reserves, by trying to make them part-time professional soldiers rather than taking reserve skills and letting them teach the military how to do things a different way. Nations have differed on this, but I think we've kind of tried to fill in the gaps in our capability with plugging in part-time workers, and that's not maybe what we could do. And Ukraine's shown that you can take a well-motivated plumber, turn them into a soldier, and they can bring a lot of stuff to that soldiering as long as they understand why they're doing it. And of course, defending your homeland is a pretty clear mission. And so that moral component is strong for Ukraine. For our societies, belief in the military is not as strong, and in the UK alone, you're more likely to know someone who is in the prison system as a convict than you are to know someone in the military in your family, which is terrifying. So we have to think about how we increase that interaction with the military and restore the military as part of the backbone of society at a time when it has less priority and less money. So I think those are the big challenges to capability overall as I see them. I said I can talk more in questions about much more detailed things if anyone wants to get into the role of autonomous maritime systems or the use of AI or the way that Ukraine in particular is using agile systems to increase its effect on the battlefield. We can talk about that. But I think from the big picture, it's thinking about those three components together, and you can't overall make up for lack of mass with any amount of clever ideas, any amount of focus, and that is the real important learning point here. And the only way we can get that mass at the moment is through alliances. So thanks to NATO for sponsoring the conference, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much, Justin. We can go to General Everhard next, please.
Thanks, Greg. I think this is a very good question. And as we look at challenges to Western military capabilities, I'm mindful that we could make the wrong comparisons and learn the wrong lessons from the war in Ukraine. For example, we have not seen the air war unfold as many expected, but do not think that air can be denied in the way that it has been denied in Ukraine, given Western convergence, given our expertise in suppression of enemy air defences, and the huge investments you see going on in the moment in counter-drone, counter-UAS and drone defeat technology, which we're beginning to see play out in Ukraine. Actually, as an aside, I think it's interesting. I grew up in an era of armour, anti-armour being the constant struggle. I think now it's going to be UAS, counter-UAS, as we struggle for supremacy. I also think we have a problem because others, including Russia and China, will be also studying the conflict with an eye to formulating an approach that gives them an edge, that gives them a decisive advantage in a future war as they work to challenge Western capabilities. So how do we judge if we are thinking coherently about the challenges to Western military capabilities? How do we measure the effectiveness of our capabilities against a thinking enemy? Justin had a structure. I could start by looking at the warfighting domains. I could examine the warfighting functions. But I think this is probably now too simplistic. Should we instead now be talking about the multi-domain or the multi-dimensional whole, 15D warfare? And this was set out in the India Defence Review and is very much a framework that's in play in India. And that was written back in 2018, and even then noted the emergence of, quote, two peculiar dimensions of warfare, city warfare, and we've seen the importance of cities in Ukraine, and unmanned robotic warfare, remote warfare. And of course, unmanned sea, land systems, air systems, have been shown to be real force multipliers in Ukraine. So India was ahead of the game, and it reminds me always to look across the road to see where people are thinking cleverly. So I think we need to be careful. What is our theory of victory? Once we've agreed how we are going to win the next war, we can then look carefully at the challenges to our military and indeed our civil, because resilience is the first line of defence capabilities. And as we formulate our theory of victory, I think that we have very usefully been reminded that sustained, high-intensity, high-attrition combined arms warfare is hard and it requires mass. It also reminds us that the Western way of war is combined arms maneuver, enhanced and not yet replaced by technology. And of course, in the West, we've added another layer of complexity with the introduction of multi-domain operations. And I'll just read out the definition of MDO from Field Manual 3-0, October 22, a US definition, but it defines convergence as an outcome created by the concerted employment of capabilities with multiple domains and echelons against combinations of decisive points in any domain to create effects against a system formation decision maker in a specific geographic area. And I just spent a month in the US experimenting on convergence, and I can tell you, it is hard. Less against fixed targets, but it is hard. So is this our theory of victory? I think it probably is, but it's going to take a huge amount of effort to align the alliance behind MDO. What is clear is that Ukraine has shown us that if we were to fight tomorrow, I think too many of our soldiers would die for reasons that are entirely predictable and preventable. We have too many capability gaps, NATO would call them major shortfall areas, and we carry too many vulnerabilities. And I'll just take one example. You know, let's look at the most important warfighting function, command and control. An autopsy following another war would uncover what we've known for years. So a black elephant, not a black swan, that our headquarters are too big, too identifiable, too locatable, too immovable, and too vulnerable to multi-domain attack. And if you look at Ukraine, you know, Russian headquarters have been hit hard and often. The Ukrainians ruthlessly prioritize counter-command activity, targeting commanders and their headquarters. And they've been selected because they represent single points of failure, or their elimination causes severe disruption. And if you're interested in this, there's a very good paper, a recent paper, March 23, The Graveyard of Command Posts by Errol Beagle and Slider, you know, big US Army influence here. And it lists the deaths of 1,500 senior Russian officers, colonel, lieutenant colonel level, and 10 generals through counter-command activity. You know, and this has had an inevitable impact on Russian tempo, coherence, and fighting spirits. I'm nearly there. I think we know that many companies fail not because they do something wrong, but because they do what used to be the right thing for too long, and they become trapped by the rigidity of their, or inadequacy of their business model. And I think it's the same in the military. You know, the evidence, I think, again confirmed in Ukraine, is really in favor of radical change to our command and control and in our decision-making, if we are going to have any hope of surviving and securing the initiative on the battlefields of the 21st century. And yet all of us evolve very slowly. You know, we experiment, and I'm going to misquote Charles Baudelaire here, who said, you know, the smartest ruse of the devil is to persuade you that experimentation is progression. It's not. You know, we need to identify technologies that work now and get them at scale into our headquarters. Otherwise, we're going to be big, slow, and dead. And I think, again, the lesson we've learned is, you know, headquarters exist to help their commanders make quick decisions and good decisions, not to minimize every level of risk, which is what our current decision-making process does. So I think it's, as one example, time to change that before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Now down to General DAMEN.
Thank you, Greg. There is a presentation. And it might come up. Oh, there it is. It's an extract from a larger presentation I did, because if you're talking about logistics, yeah, there it is. Talking logistics, you have to talk cradle to cradle, and it's a bit difficult to see how you recycle the spent rounds. But we have to look at the whole supply chain, if we're talking logistics. We have to talk service levels. Lessons learned, lessons identified, but war is not Afghanistan, war is not Iraq, war is not ice cream on the menu. We really have to reconsider how we will function in war, which is really basic. And in the Netherlands, it takes us a lot of effort to reteach our soldiers, or even teach our soldiers, because they never knew anything else, that the service level has to be different. And even then, you need so much stuff just to keep a brigade going. And the first lines is when they're not fighting, and it's even worse. It's even worse when they start fighting, and that's only a brigade. And how many brigades NATO has at the moment? I wouldn't dare to answer that question. 163 on paper, sir. Okay, multiply this by 163 and take into account that you have to move this stuff over 1,500 kilometers. And the last time they really did that was in the Second World War. And yeah, we had operations after the Second World War, especially the both Gulf wars, but they were not on that level. And what have we arranged together? Nothing. Nothing. NATO doctrine. Logistics is a national responsibility. And yeah, the will to fight is probably the most important part in winning a battle. But if you don't feed that fighter for 2 days, there is no will left. So we have to make sure that we got the stuff where it's needed. Then the battlefield in the First World War, it was simple. Maybe 10 kilometers kill zone, and the rest was basically it was peacetime. First World War, civilian contractors providing them stuff, ammunition, everything, and it's really difficult to define what's the rear area at this moment. And not only physical, but especially if you look at cyber and hybrid. Did some interesting exercises, logistic exercises, where we won the war, not by starting to shoot, but making sure, via cyber, that the harbors, where the equipment, the ammunition, the food should arrive, were not available. We virtually, of course, blew up the cranes in the harbor, and the war had ended before it even started. And yeah, I hear the field manuals 3.0 and 4.0 mentioned regularly. 4.0 logistics was there before 3.0, the new one, which is always the case. Logistics is always first. But both field manuals mention dispersed. Dispersed. We have to operate dispersed. But nowhere in these manuals is mentioned how we should do that. And if I look at logistics, it's going to be found via drones. It's going to be killed. So you have to have dispersed logistics, but how do you find your stuff back if it's all over the field? It's a bit like a squirrel looking for his nuts, you know. He put them there, but he couldn't remember where. Then military mobility, one of my other hobbies. Like I said, like I mentioned, huge amounts of stuff having to move through Europe. Maybe we should make sure it's already there. We had forward storage in Germany during the Cold War. I would propose building storage sites here, Poland, Romania, the Balkans, Finland, and have the stuff already in place. And it's huge amounts. It's huge amounts, and you see discussion in the European press. How long could we go to war? I think the UK was 3 days, was mentioned in the press, and so I got the same question in the Netherlands, and my answer was not longer. Same for forward maintenance and repair. This is the DAMEN shipyards here in Romania. Not a family. They threw me out of the family when I chose the army. But make sure that you have the capabilities in place near the place where you expect the enemy to attack. Then industry, tendering, it's hopeless. It's hopeless. If you want to win a war and the war is with the procurement people, you're not going to win it. Use Article 346 of the EU Treaty. A lot more. Then on the military side, make sure that you align your requirements. This is a horse designed by a committee. And if you have a horse designed by a military committee, it will probably have 3 bumps and 6 legs and everything. I mean, good is good enough. Lead times are lousy anyhow. We want new submarines in the Netherlands. The requirements were published last year, and we probably have them fully operational capable in 2036. Not going to work. Then look at the supply chain. Disruption. There is always disruption. So make sure that all the capability is not on the other side of the world, but go for inshoring, nearshoring. Look at your rare minerals, which we need for electrification, and that for 80% are in the hands of the Chinese. And this is my Delft blue tile. only one of the words is an acronym. Just in time, it doesn't work. If you want to win a war, make sure that the stuff is already there. So we need a lot of action now. Action by the politicians, action by the military, but also action by society. If you want to raise a child, you need the whole village. If you want to win a war, you need the whole nation. And that's the link to the longer presentation. So if you make a picture of that one, you can find it online. Thanks.
Thank you very much, General. Appreciate everybody's insights here. So we have a few minutes left, I think until 4:05 to take some questions. So if I can make you out in the audience with these bright lights, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll ask the questions.
Thank you very much. And excellent points about being sure we are learning the right lessons, which I think is essential. But still, how can we, let's say, balance the requirements which we had for years with the capacity, which in a conventional war like we've seen in Ukraine, it's essential. How can we have that, let's say, how can we operate in an environment in which there is no sanctuary, exactly like was mentioned here? Are we sure we are learning the right lessons? Because I've just noticed now, I mean, there is an interesting report about Israel, how Israel is analyzing the lesson learned from the war in Ukraine, and they say, okay, our lessons might be very different from others. Is it enough to say, okay, EU or NATO or whoever, or should every country analyze from its own point of view and try to see how can we aggregate in an alliance, in EU, but also nationally? Thank you.
Anybody want to take that one?
I'm happy to take a start. I'm sure others will have a thought. I mean, to pick up your very first point, something I meant to say is capability is usability. And I think is what you were saying, General. I mean, the right answer now, or a good answer now is better than the perfect answer one day. And I remember I started in the Royal Armoured Corps in the mid-1990s on a vehicle called CVRT, which you'll currently see driving around Ukraine, where it's very popular because it's very small, it hides behind a bush, it's very light, it gets over the mud. Not very well protected. But I started in '95 and I was told, don't get used to this vehicle, we're getting a replacement soon. That replacement is a vehicle now called Ajax. I've not yet seen one. It's still waiting to come into service. So over a full career later, we've still not seen it. So because we honestly, and I think there's something wrong with that program, but we were chasing perfection, I think, with platforms. We had time, we had space, we didn't have a lot of money, so it went into, we must build the right thing for 50 years. And there's a strong argument, buy something available now. If you were buying a car, you'd buy the best car you could get now for a few years. You wouldn't think about the car you want in 2050 and buy it now. You're going to get something, use it, dispose of it, get something else. It's cheaper, there's more support. But of course, you run into political considerations about supply chain, jobs in the UK versus Germany versus Romania, and those other considerations. We're not going to get away from that. But I think when you're small, efficiency, logistics, survivability, all these things, take on a lot more importance. So I'm not saying we should necessarily cut down our technological ambitions and thinking, but I would rather have, and it's what we said about Ukraine, there might be slightly better tanks than the Leopard 2 if you argue about it in the Abrams or Challenger 2 in different ways, but I'll take 500 Leopard 2 over 25 Challenger 2, however good the individual vehicle is. And that's just an example, so don't take me to court on that one. But I'd much rather have lots of one vehicle. I can use it, it's usable, that is capability. Is it simple, so I can rapidly train people to use it? And actually we've seen the Ukrainians do training in 5 weeks that we will allow 6 months for. Because they're motivated and because they're taking more risk, we become risk averse. So again, that affects our capability, it affects our decision making and experimentation, which we've often learned good lessons from, including in the 1920s, where we learned exactly how to operate a Panzer division and then gave it up. But the Germans looked at those lessons and incorporated them by 1936. We have the same issue, I think, now that we won't bring these things to fruition because experimentation takes place. We learn the lessons, but no one wants to pull the trigger on spending the money because it's changing all the time. So again, I'd rather have a good force now that I can use with lots of people. Yes, I could probably have better soldiers, I could probably have better technology, but the Ukrainians are showing you can take things that aren't quite as good and use them effectively together. Over.
Well, I'll try to add from a different perspective. And we talked about a new culture for strategy, especially for each ally and all of us combined. But I think we all know the model from well-known strategists of government people and military. Russia knows how to play with those 3 points in different stages, and that's how it creates fissures. So you need a revigorated national culture for security and defense, because you can't have one at peacetime, the other one in crisis, or 2 at peace and 1 in crisis. They need to come together to a point of balance. And that requires education. And in the forum today, it's an instrument or a means relevant enough. So they need to come to a point nationally, and then the alliance culture of this is really happening. This is coming after World War II in the 21st century, and is it addressing common values and transatlantic partnership. And that was an engine for, not for national survival, but it was for national progress. That's where I think that Russia will lose in another definition of what victory means. They're failing to modernize the nation. They're not ready for 21st century, whatever happens to that.
A very quick question. I think the NATO defence planning process, of course, the catalogue that captures the capabilities that we need to deliver on our level of ambition is being updated constantly to reflect 21st century warfare. And because it is agreed at consensus, it reflects the collective will of the alliance, and I think will therefore capture all our independent views on the lessons that come out from Ukraine.
Another question?
Good afternoon. My name is Valentin Berca. We are speaking about Ukraine lessons learned. And my question is how could we integrate preparing population for defense with joint all domain C2? Thank you.
Well, I'll start because I mentioned.
If we look at the advertisement we've been looking at, there's a plastic surgery advertisement here on our monitor. So cyber-wise, there's a lot to learn.
And Hans, you're right. Sometimes I learn coincidence means destiny, but if you see what we have here, that's different from what we're talking about. Good point. And I'll start because I mentioned the vital role of regional plans and national plans, and integration of C2. That's crucial, again. Why? Because it starts there, and I gave the examples of Romania being prepared with multinational Corps Southeast, multinational Division Southeast, and multinational Brigade Southeast, a backbone of command and control, trained and ready. Well, the Corps is going to be FOC this year, but my point is, when it comes to partners, we need to determine what is our flexibility in integrating an effective C2. Because there are times where interoperability of the communication information system, the CIS, that enables the C2 comes into role. You really have to be prepared to defend that CIS against electronic warfare in different depth of the battle space for actually a nation of war. But here, when you talk here and you're preparing for deterrence and defense, you really need to find the right tools. The last but not least, the companies are helping. The private sector is helping a lot with bringing some of those technical solutions to actually help update the software. And I'll stop here, sir.
I think it's a very good question. And of course, joint all-domain C2, as viewed by the Americans and Project Convergence, will require a digital spine that does not yet exist. So it's still in the process of experimentation. However, what you do see in another space is commercial systems that you can buy that already give you the ability to cohere your domains in bounded battle space. And I think that's good. So we are learning how to do it. You know, whether when Ukraine launches its offensive, we are going to see the first truly multi-domain campaign, I don't know. You know, they've had time to think about it. It might be possible. And they won't be using digital spines. They'll be using bog standard, ordinary commercial communications probably.
Well, I think, and that's a really important point. I mean, Ukraine has one advantage, which is they're not fighting as an alliance per se, so they have language commonalities and technological commonalities, at least because it's a single nation at war, albeit with lots of people supporting. But I think it is their improvisation in the use of, for example, the SpaceX technology for microsatellites. Everyone's suddenly seeing what that can bring to bear. Now, there are other solutions available, but that has enabled them to have secure, on-the-move, high-bandwidth comms, and they've stood up to the enemy in terms of electronic warfare and denial we were most trained to fear. We definitely has some pretty advanced capabilities, but the Ukrainian approach of using Google Workspace over the internet with DJI Mavic drones feeding live to a tank company commander who's directing the attack, having Uber guns, you know, where you can call for your fire mission on an app. I do wonder if you get to rate the fire mission, you know, 5 stars or something like that. But, you know, it's a really good system that Ukraine was helped with by the digital native component in Ukraine. Of course, that was the major part of the Ukrainian economy, was software development. And of course, Eastern Europe has a lot in common with that elsewhere, as well as, I think, the motivation for national resilience that's maybe missing the further west you go. And certainly whenever I visited this part of the world over the last decade, there was a real feeling that Russia is a proximate threat. We could be invaded. We could be hit by missiles. As you go to the UK and France, I think that was seen as, why on earth would you worry about this? But this part of the world always said this can happen. So there's also that, when you talk about integrating with society, I think that's such an important thing that people here think about this. In Poland, the buildings still have bomb shelters built in them because of the Soviet era. And you know, it's still in the mindset that actually this can happen, you can be invaded, you are at risk. Wars can happen at home as well as in the desert, as well as in, you know, faraway places. We don't have that throughout the alliance. And I think when it comes to integrating not just command control, but also thinking and civil resilience, there's a lot of education here, but we're still seeing arguments against that. And of course, our adversaries are pushing a peace narrative, a non-threat narrative that's taken very strong hold in a number of countries within the alliance, and that's not going to go away.
Okay, we're about out of time, but I'll just take one more question because I'm out of time on this clock, but I have time on that one, so we'll split the difference. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will make it very short. I'm Colonel retired Mihai Stier, currently with the New Strategy Center. So I would like to endorse and echo 2 ideas expressed here. One from General BERDILță, which says that it's very important to integrate national allied plans, military plans with the national ones. And second is from Mr. CRUMP, talking about the physical level and creating mass, which cannot be replaced on the battlefield. For countries on the eastern flank, it's obvious that it's very important to, they rely, actually their defense rely a lot on alliance presence here. And I would highly appreciate if the panel can discuss concretely how we can create mass from the allied support in a country which so heavily rely on it in the wake of the experiences we witnessed in Ukraine. So I see challenges for the title of the panel is challenges for the Western military capabilities, but maybe we can discuss the challenges, how to use them in a context. Thank you.
James?
I'll just start with one opening comment, which of course, when you look at NATO's new concepts, the concept for the deterrent and defence of the Euro-Atlantic area and SACEUR's AOR strategic plan, one of the ideas embedded within them, of course, is that mass is less important. You need good tactical presence, but you defeat the enemy through convergence. In other words, you can bring down death and destruction from systems well outside the battle area onto the enemy. Now, I still think that's largely in the future, but it is an idea which I think has real merit. And in the meantime, of course, NATO has a new force model, which will enhance much stronger host nation defence forces. You look at what nations like Romania, Poland, Estonia are spending. And that is designed to get the right forces in the right place at the right time. But again, it's still work in progress.
General Berdilla.
Well, in the value of time, it is important. It is important how you integrate the capabilities, but I would like to end the panel and salute the other members of the messages that we provided today for the importance of some of the things that you underlined. One thing, deterring in one of us defends all of us. So this is the solidarity at the military operational level, and this is how actually all the allies understood to provide integrated, more relevant regional plans for today. And thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're out of time, and I want to thank the panel. Maybe can I give them a round of applause, please?